And we welcome in former NFL defensive lineman, does a great job, Sports Radio 610, along with Sean Pendergast in the morning, and that's our pal in Seth Payne. Seth, appreciate the time. Thanks so much for doing this. How you been?
I'm good, man. I'm trying to. I don't know how you guys with national shows keep track of all this stuff. I have a hard enough time just keeping track of the Texans and Nick Caserio with all his shenanigans. I'm more worried about you, Zach. How you doing?
Well, I'm doing fantastic. You know, I'm young and I'm not getting up there in age like you. So, you know, it's easy for me. By the way, I thought I missed something, Seth. So, like, I just searched your name before the show, like, just to see, like, what was on your Twitter feed and stuff. And it goes, Seth Payne named new defensive line coach at some college. Did you know there's a defensive line coach in college by the name of Seth Payne?
Oh, yeah. I've been tracking him since college because he was a defensive tackle like myself in college. And I want to say, I was still playing in the NFL. And then he got into coaching when he was out. So we've had him on our show a couple times. He's Coach Seth Payne. I'm loud Seth Payne. Yeah. That's how we'll go with that.
Well, yesterday we're sitting here doing the show, and we get the breaking news alert that the Texans are trading Laremy Tunsil. That caught me by surprise, but sometimes, right, you do the national show, you don't know everything, all the conversations that are going on in the local market. So when you saw the return and you got the news yesterday that Laremy Tunsil was getting traded from the Texans to the Commanders, what was your first reaction?
Okay, this is where I think the city of Houston diverges sharply from the rest of America in this, because amongst myself personally and many people, I would say the majority in the fan base, we're happy about it as long as they got back a good return. And the people that break that stuff down seem to think this is a pretty good return for where Laremy Tunsil is, how much money he's making, where he is at 31 years old, because there's been a culture issue on that entire offense. If you watch the Texans play, anybody that saw them play this year, on any given Sunday, usually the defense is playing like banshees with their hair on fire. They are tough, they're physical, they're all those things. The offense was the exact opposite. They were a soft offense. So, yes, Laremy Tunsil is one of the best pass protectors in the NFL. As an offensive lineman, he's severely lacking when it comes to caring about being a run blocker. So when you talk about, I hear people talk about him being one of the best offensive tackles in the league. He's not even in the same conversation as guys like Penei Sewell or Trent Williams or any of those guys, the all-pro caliber guys. And it's been frustrating for multiple years now because he also tends to be one of the league leaders in penalties. And a lot of people say, okay, who cares about a false start here or there? He had 12 false starts, 15 pre-snap penalties, and a couple of actual offensive line penalties, a couple of holds along the way. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating for fans when a really nice reception gets negated by a false start or a drive goes from third and 6 to 3rd and 11. So there's a lot wrapped up into him being one of the highest paid guys on the team when you've got a coach like DeMeco Ryans who really wants players who are kind of a mirror image of himself, just hard, tough football players. They get a lot of unsportsmanlike or unnecessary roughness penalties on defense, and the offense hasn't been like that at all. So on that entire offensive line where it was just replete with disappointing performances by players, people had grown tired of Laremy Tunsil being the guy that some of those younger guys might be trying to emulate. And it's a culture shift, and people get tired of hearing about culture in football because so many coaches really don't know how to establish it. DeMeco knows how to establish it. It's just he's only done it on the defensive side of the ball now. So it was a lot of people in Houston were happy or intrigued or excited to hear the news, but now the real long, hard slog is, okay, this is a bad offensive line last year. How do you go about fixing it?
Seth Payne here with us. I'm glad you shared that insight because I watched a lot of the Texans last year. I was really intrigued about where they were going and where they were heading because it was an awesome story. Like that organization, how many times did we have you on prior to the last 2 years? It was always something negative and just ridiculous with the Houston Texans, and to see how quickly they turned it around just by getting the right quarterback, the right coach, and a superstar pass rusher. I'm like, okay, they had a good season. They won a playoff game. All right, they lose to the Ravens. No shame in that. Now, are they going to be able to take that next step into going from a good team to a contending team? And you're right. Like the Kansas City game, they were good enough defensively to win that game in Arrowhead up against the Chiefs. The offense was just lost. So I ask you this, with the moves that they've made, they got CJ Gardner-Johnson today on the defensive side of the ball. They get rid of Laremy Tunsil. I know there's still a lot more to do, but Where do you think this team is heading after seeing what they've done the last 2 years?
I think if you look at the moves the Texans have made in the offseason, first, they fired Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator, and now they've cut their starting right guard from the beginning of the season. They've traded Kenyon Green, their first-round pick, and starting left guard early in the season. They've traded away Laremy Tunsil. They think that improvement along the offensive line and then just having a better play caller, hopefully, from their standpoint, and Nick Caley, we don't know. He's never been an offensive coordinator before. That's a big part of it. And then I think, there's two sides to the Laremy Tunsil thing. I think there's a lot of pent-up emotion in Houston about Laremy Tunsil. So there's kind of the visceral side, but strictly from the dollars and cents, he was making a lot of money. You get a bunch of cap savings in trading him. And the Texans' offensive line was so bad last year that they're in a position where signing a guy like Laken Tomlinson, an offensive guard, for 1 year, $4 million, he's an immediate upgrade, even as just a blue-collar, stable starter. I think it's one of those things where if you do well in the draft, maybe you take an offensive lineman in the first round. If you sign a couple of just solid blue-collar offensive linemen, and then if you get an offensive coordinator who was a tight ends coach for most of his NFL career, is very much involved in the nuts and bolts of the run game and in pass protection, all those things that Bobby Slowick wasn't, they're hoping that they just get fundamentally more sound, because there are a lot of things going on in the offensive line that were guys not playing up to their talent level and in doing so with really poor fundamentals. So it's nothing exciting. It's nothing glitzy, but it's really just playing cleaner football, executing better. And then you have the guys like Nico Collins. The other side of, letting go of Laremy Tunsil is you're going to have to pay CJ Stroud likely next offseason. Will Anderson is going to be going into his third year, and he sees all these guys making $40 million, or at least one guy making $40 million per year. They've got Derek Stingley was an all-pro this year. He's in that going into his fourth year, that window when he could start thinking about renegotiations. So it didn't make a lot of sense. You weren't going to be able to keep Laremy Tunsil long-term anyway, so it was probably better to get some compensation now.
Seth Payne here with us. One more on the Texans, then we'll go around the rest of the league because a lot going on with the pass rushers, like you're saying. So this time last year, I had CJ Stroud ranked as the 5th best quarterback in football. Going into this year, I have him as 8. Now, I don't think he was horrible last year. There was a lot working against him. But to me, I had to drop him down a few spots. I had Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts, Jaden Daniels, and Matthew Stafford in front of him. Like, how high are you on the list are you willing to go with CJ Stroud, and where do you think is the basement for him when you look at the ranking around the league?
Look, I think you got to base it on performance, and that's what his performance was last year. When you watch him play, he's still doing some really impressive things. But to put it in context, Pat Mahomes had one of the worst games of his career in the Super Bowl. He was getting pressured 36% of the time, I believe was the number. On the average for the entire season, CJ Stroud was getting pressured 39% of the time. So it's just really hard for a young quarterback to play awesome football in those circumstances. You don't make excuses for him. He certainly could have done certain things better, but there is an element of just simply getting better pass protection. And then the other side of it, like with Laremy Tunsil, who didn't ever seem all that interested in run blocking, they were a horrendous rushing football team. They were bailed out a little bit because Joe Mixon was so good. But even in Joe Mixon's good games, like they'd have games where Joe Mixon had 125 yards rushing and they didn't run the ball well because on half of his carries, he was getting hit in the backfield. But then he'd have a few nice big runs, but the blocking just wasn't there. So establishing a run game, and not in the old school manner, just having a competent run game. It's fine if you're going to be a pass heavy team, but you have to at least have a competent run game. They did not have a competent run game, and getting him some protection. I think I'm not down on CJ Stroud at all. I think ultimately this last year was a good year for him in terms of learning.
The only criticism I have of CJ Stroud, I like him a lot. I think he's going to be a very good quarterback in this league for a long time. He's really impressed me since leaving Ohio State and what he's done the last 2 years in the NFL. Do you think, though, that maybe he was too big for his own britches this year? And what I mean by that is I go back to he's walking around and acting like he's a 10, 15-year pro, giving advice to Caleb Williams after a game when it's like, dude, he's a rookie. You're a second-year player. Did that at all come on up in the Houston radio scene this year?
Oh, yeah. And he brought it up. To his credit, he brought it up at the end of the season. Somebody, I think Big Sarge here in Houston, asked him about if he learned what it took to be a franchise quarterback or to be that guy to lead an NFL offense. And he just said, to paraphrase him, yeah, I thought I knew, but I didn't know. And I try not to be a grumpy old man, as you so, politely pointed out earlier. I try not to be a grumpy old man about guys going on podcasts and everything.
Yeah.
But so, guys are going to be out there. They're going to be on social media. I do think that he saw firsthand, after a very promising rookie season, the word of warning that I and others locally were giving going into last year was, hey, you guys had a promising year last year offensively in 2023. But you weren't a good offense. You've still got to get to that level. And, CJ, to his credit, brought it up on his own at the end of the season that he learned a lot of lessons about, it's not as easy as it felt like it might have been the first year.
I think talking to your co-host, as Seth Payne was with us, I think Sean joined us in the summer, and he's like, hey, the reviews of Stephon Diggs were glowing. He seems to be a lot better teammate than what the perception was. Everyone keeps on talking about him. Unfortunately, he gets hurt and it doesn't work out. They make the move for Christian Kirk. I know Tank Dell's unfortunately coming off an injury. You got Nico Collins, so I'm assuming Stephon Diggs will not be returning to Houston. But do you think he still has good football left in him?
I do think he does have good football left in him, and he played well. The numbers don't reflect an awesome season, but he was under some of the same constraints, and I think especially maybe with Bobby Sloak as the offensive coordinator, he didn't really exploit everything underneath and in the quick game the way he could have, as much cover two as they were seeing. But as far as being a teammate and a leader, he 100% embraced that role. He was on a 1-year contract, and his track record now in the NFL is at Minnesota, at Buffalo, and in Houston. Nobody's got any issues with him his first year or two. So he's at that age where I don't think people are going to really be looking at him for more than 1 or 2 years. The big question is just, he's been a really durable guy, but he's also 31, 32 years old, coming off of an ACL. For a guy that really relies on that quickness, I think I could see him being a guy that waits maybe until later in the offseason when teams can get a look at him and where he is in his rehab and just how much of that twitch is still there.
All right, let's get to Myles Garrett. He joined us live on the Super Bowl. I was basically believing everything he was saying. That
we played his clips from your show.
I appreciate that. Yeah, he was saying, hey, it's simple. I love Cleveland, but I want to go somewhere where I could win. I guess when someone offers you, $123 million guaranteed and $40 million a year, you'll take the losing to stay in Cleveland.
Yeah, there's the old story. Which old comedian was it? The story of a man that asked a woman, hey, will you sleep with me for $100? She says, no. And it's like, okay, well, how about $1 million? And she's like, okay, yeah, I'll do that. Okay.
Let me go get a cocktail too before I do that.
I've only got $100. And she says, well, what kind of a woman do you think I am? And he says, we've already established that. I'm just negotiating price. That's I think how it went for Myles Garrett. He thought he thought he had integrity, but sometimes your integrity is tested by a big wad of cash.
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate, but I think it separates what fans and players kind of priorities are. Like, as a fan, I go, I want to go see this guy win. He's one of the best, if not the best defensive player in football. And I'm not saying a player doesn't want to win, but you could talk yourself into something maybe being better than what it is when you have a lot of Benjamins thrown your way.
Yeah, and maybe a good pep talk from Andrew Berry about, hey, this is our plan. This is where we're going. Hey, we're going to get Kenny Pickett. But everything's going to be fine. Yeah. And here's a bunch of cash.
What do you think is going to happen, by the way, the first 2 picks of the draft? Like, you have Tennessee sitting there at 1, you have Cleveland sitting there at 2. Do you think it's going to be quarterback, or not so much?
I think it's going to be Cam Warden and somebody else. I just there's just, I don't want to even call it smoke about Shedeur Sanders. I feel like Shedeur's got a lot of well-deserved publicity for being a part of turning that program around. But when you look at him, as objectively as possible, he's not that, when the comps are Teddy Bridgewater, Geno Smith, and then you also do have a personality that, whether you love it or hate it, it's going to rub some teams the wrong way. But he also just physically isn't built the way you want a guy that's going to go in the top 3 picks of the draft. I have a hard time seeing anybody trade up to get Shedeur Sanders.
So I agree that Cam Ward's going to go 1. 2, I think it's either going to be Shedeur or I think it's going to be Travis Hunter. Because if Cleveland stays at 2, and let's say even if the Giants move up to 1 or Tennessee keeps the pick, I think one way or another it's going to be Cam Ward. I would say the best player in the draft is Abdul Carter, but after the Browns just gave Myles Garrett that much money and you have him locked up there, I kind of think it takes Abdul Carter out of the running in Cleveland, I would imagine.
Yeah. And I guess if I missed any, I was out on a walk for a couple hours. Did I miss any news about Aaron Rodgers?
No, not yet.
Yeah. I mean, at the one point, the rumor floating around was that Aaron Rodgers' second choice or the second most likely scenario was the Tennessee Titans.
Because he has a house in Nashville or something.
Oh, is that what the link was?
Yeah. Okay. So I just remember this from the last time Rodgers was available. People floated out Tennessee because he has a house in Nashville, I gather.
Yeah. I just, yeah, and I always get nervous talking about Aaron Rodgers with rumors like this because from 1 hour to the next, it's, oh no, you idiot! Haven't you heard he's going to the Steelers? Like, all right, yeah. So was Brandon Ayuk, and that was it doesn't always work out that way.
But in this case, I do think Rodgers is going to the Steelers. By the way,
yeah,
I think it makes too much sense for both parties. Like, what you're going to really bring back Russell Wilson, and then for Rodgers, if it's not the Steelers, where are you going to go? Tennessee or the Giants to end your career? That's just sad.
Right. I think from however much of a football fan he is, or just a student of the game, and looking at what's your realistic scenario for going to a team that's going to be competitive, and the Steelers are always competitive at the very least. And I just, when I talk to veteran players about this, and I remember talking to JJ Watt about this when he was looking around, and he's at the end of his career, that, ring chasing, it's a dicey scenario. Unless you're talking about 1 or 2 teams in the league at any given point, it's kind of tricky about, okay, yeah, who's really got the best opportunity of winning a Super Bowl, but who's got the best chance of giving him a non-Jets-like experience? I think it's the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Well, let me ask you this then, because I said this the other day. TJ Watt, right, is looking for a new deal. I think he wants to stay in Pittsburgh. The Steelers haven't won a playoff game since 2016. We all know the Steelers are a good organization, but they're far away from what they used to be. If you were in TJ Watt's shoes, I know you say ring chasing is a little bit tricky, but would you try to put yourself in position to go elsewhere and go somewhere where you could win a ring?
Oh boy, that's such a personal decision. And the one thing I'd say about that, if I try to put myself in the shoes of a guy that's been on the same team for a long time, and when it's a team like the Steelers, where I don't know if he wants to live in Pittsburgh when he's done or not, it's just a different attachment that those fans have to their players. And a franchise like that, with the storied history of the Steelers, there's something special about being on a team like that for pretty much your entire career. Maybe he goes off somewhere else at the end of it. But it's really hard to be a winning football team every single year. Yeah. And we've seen there's lots of teams that can do it for a year or two. It's hard to be a winning team every single year. My advice to him, looking at it heavily through my filter, is to stay with a team like that. Pulling a Joe Thomas or pulling apparently a Myles Garrett and being with one team that's definitely like your chances of getting anywhere with that team are slim and none. It's just being a lifelong Steeler isn't a bad option.
Let me just get your thoughts on Trey Hendrickson. It wasn't my first thought when the Myles Garrett news came out, but it was like a third or fourth thought that once I saw the Myles Garrett deal and after I went through all the takes, I'm like, oh, I think Trey Hendrickson, Seth Payne, is going to be on his way out in Cincinnati because that only increases the market. And we know the Bengals are cheap and also have a lot of guys to pay.
They're cheap and they have a lot of guys to pay, and they're not as cheap as they used to be. Yeah. They spend a respectable amount of cash. This is going to be the second time I'm going to be a grumpy old man. I'll tell you honestly, when I first got into radio, I was all about always defending the players. And hey, owners cut players. They ask players to take pay cuts all the time. Man, now I've completely flipped. I'm tired. I'm tired of guys forcing their way out of situations. The old Bengals, I would have said, yeah, force your way out of there. They're miserable. They don't spend any money. You sign if you want a bunch of guaranteed money, but you want the ability to move, then sign a short-term guaranteed contract. Danielle Hunter last year signed a 2-year contract that was almost 100% guaranteed. Like, that's something that he can live with. That he's going to make a boatload of guaranteed money. He'll be a free agent if he wants. If the team wants him to extend, then so be it. But I'm kind of tired of basketball and football just increasingly moving towards the trend of if you're a good enough player, you're basically a perennial free agent. If you also don't mind being a pain in the ass.
And Hendrickson's a heck of a player, but I think there's going to be more of a market for him now because Myles Garrett is off the board. Like all those teams that were in for Myles Garrett, I know some probably get eliminated after the start of free agency, but the 2 or 3 leftover teams, they got to be calling for Trey.
Well, I'll tell you, and again, I'll go back to baseball versus football. You know what baseball players very rarely do is agitate to get out of a deal. And the players do a great job, I think, as a union of saying, hey, we've got guaranteed contracts. Mm-hmm. It's not in the CBA. That's just by precedent. But owners got to feel comfortable that if they give you that money, they've got your services. And in football, it's a different timeline because of the injury factor. But if you want to be able to move, then sign a 1 or 2 year deal. And that's like, I really don't have any sympathy for Trey Hendrickson. They're like, oh, you took a boatload of cash when you had the opportunity, but now you've played really, really well. So now I got to get out of here. I just sign a shorter term deal. It's as simple as that. Owners are very willing, or GMs are very willing to give guaranteed money or a big chunk of guaranteed money if it's on a short-term contract. If you take that bag up front, then that's the decision you made.
I will let Seth Payne get off his lawn in just a second, and I'll let you run. But before I let you go, Indianapolis, the whole Daniel Jones situation, there's going to be a competition with Anthony Richardson.
Yeah.
I think this is what I said earlier. Richardson will win the job, but inevitably he'll get benched at some point in the season.
Playing against Anthony Richardson is terrifying because on any given Sunday, he can destroy you with some brilliant throws or with his legs. And the Texans, the first Colts game this year versus Anthony Richardson was way closer than it should have been, partly because Anthony Richardson made some big plays, but also the Texans partly won because Anthony Richardson airmailed a wide open receiver. I mean, he's less than 50% completion percentage in his career. It's bad how wildly erratic he is. And every now and then, because nobody watches the AFC South, you'll see an incredible throw and people will say, oh, I thought Anthony Richardson wasn't accurate. He's not. He's not. He's you
know what he is? He's a social media quarterback. Like there's one or two clips that you see and you go, wow, this is awesome. And then you watch the full 60 minutes and it's just not there. Or he'll have a monster game in week 2. And then you see crappy quarterback play week 3, week 4, week 5. And then it's back to being good in week 6. There's no consistency.
And I'll tell you another thing. When it comes to the maturity side of things, I 100% believe Chris Ballard, the GM, when he says that he wants Anthony Richardson to have a genuine competition. And it's kind of a testament that I do think Daniel Jones is a genuine competition for him. When he tapped out of that game, I know a lot of people wondered, hey, why is that a big deal? Because, defensive linemen do it all the time. I used to do it back in the day. And all I could say is, for one, it's the nature of the position that you are the leader of the offense. 2, it's not as physically taxing. He had run to get to the line of scrimmage on the game that the play that he tapped out of. But 3, it wasn't just him tapping out of the game. It was 3rd and goal in a game in which they were trailing in the 3rd quarter. I mean, it was about the worst time for a quarterback to tap out of a game. And it just shows you how detached he is from really understanding exactly how you're supposed to go about your business as a young quarterback. I mean, and his teammates didn't back him up at all. The veteran players on that team basically said, yeah, he needs to grow up a little bit. So he does need to have genuine competition. But I think he might, maybe by pressure of the owner, win the competition. But it's going to be fun to watch, except twice a year next year when the Texans are playing the Colts.
He is Seth Payne. Make sure you listen to him on the free Odyssey app, 610 Sports in Houston, along with Sean Pendergast in the mornings. Seth, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, I'm gonna go. Just I don't know, have some prune juice or something. Whatever old people do.
That annoyed him in the beginning, I could tell. There he is, Seth Payne, joining us on the show.